What would you say about a man who claims that he flew into your apartment last night and saw you talking to two strangers? At the same time, this person describes your interlocutors in detail and retells what was discussed in your conversation. Unfortunately for our inner balance, there are thousands of messages from normal people who describe similar situations. In scientific circles, this phenomenon is called an out-of-body experience. These words belong to psychologist Charles Tart, who conducted a series of laboratory studies to study the phenomenon of out-of-body experience. The first participant in this experiment was Robert Monroe, a broadcasting engineer, who accidentally gained the ability to leave his own body, move in the space of the subtle world, and even communicate with its inhabitants. Robert Allen Monroe was born in 1915 in Lexington, Kentucky, the son of a professor of medicine. After graduating from high school, he chose the profession of an engineer and graduated from the University of Ohio. After graduating, Robert began working for the Broadcasting Corporation in New York. Simultaneously with his successful career in the radio business, Monroe studied the effects of sound waves on human consciousness in the laboratory he created. He studied, in particular, the possibility of learning while sleeping. Due to the lack of volunteers, Robert conducted most of the testing on himself. During one of the experiments, an unexpected thing happened. Monroe experienced a state in which his consciousness separated from his physical body. It happened in 1958. According to Monroe, he seemed to emerge from the body. He had never experienced such experiences before and was very scared. Perhaps it was fear that helped his soul return to his body. Robert suggested that it was a hallucination caused by a serious physical or mental illness. At that time, Monroe considered himself to be quite a healthy person. He did not use drugs or medications and very rarely drank alcohol. In addition, he was not particularly religious and was not interested in Eastern teachings or mysticism. Everything that happened to him came as a complete surprise to him. Monroe underwent a full medical examination, and doctors assured him that he was completely healthy and did not suffer from mental disorders. However, the phenomenon kept recurring, especially when he was about to go to bed or just relax. He rose a couple of meters above his body and floundered in the air, as if not understanding how to return. Anger at his helplessness forced him to gradually master the process of leaving the body. Over time, Monroe realized that this condition had nothing to do with impending death and was completely manageable. During the year, he made almost 50 similar trips, which became known as out-of-body experiences. Each of them was carefully analyzed, and fear gradually gave way to curiosity. He described the results of his research in several books. After the release of his first book, Out-of-Body Travel, Monroe began receiving numerous letters from all over the world. Grateful readers who had experienced similar experiences and were seriously concerned about their mental health wrote to him. However, after reading the book, many of them got rid of fear and were able to develop the ability to leave the body, as the researcher himself did. The material from the letters that Monroe received could already be summarized and analyzed. An analysis of numerous out-of-body experiences has shown that, despite the different origins of these experiences, they have a lot in common. The authors of most of the messages could specify exactly where the new position was advantageous for observation. The soul usually hovers over the physical body, and if the action takes place indoors, then in the upper right corner. Almost everyone describes that they suddenly found themselves outside the body, without feeling any transition between the two states. However, this process apparently occurred after a drop in muscle tone, similar to what happens during sleep. Many people saw their own body, and if this was their first experience, they realized what had happened after a while. The usual reaction to being out of the body is quite curious. Most describe pleasant sensations and a lack of desire to return back. Some people, realizing that they were out of the body, managed to visit friends or collect some information, as happens in lucid dreams, when the sleeper realizes that he is dreaming and is able to influence his development. To continue his research on out-of-body experiences and the effects of sound waves on brain function, Robert Monroe founded the Institute. Now he no longer needed to conduct experiments on himself, as volunteers who wanted to experience new sensations literally besieged the reception area. After Monroe's death, his daughter Lori and his followers continued his work. Over the years, the following conclusions have been drawn related to out-of-body experiences. A person is not just a physical body. There is life after physical death. If you want and have the courage, you can always get an answer to a disturbing question. Even if the answer turns out to be unpleasant or unexpected, it still feels right. For a more convincing proof of the existence of life after death, you can try to find a recently deceased friend or acquaintance. To do this, you need to imagine what he was like during his lifetime. However, this should be done as soon as possible, since most of the deceased quickly lose interest in earthly existence. You can check if everything is okay with your loved ones. It is possible to move to any time period, past, present, or future. You can carefully examine everything around you, but you will not be able to touch the objects. Your hands pass through them. You can move to any corner of the earth, universe, or space. It is easy to return to the physical body. It is enough to focus on it. Research has not revealed the existence of other intelligent beings in the material universe. In a different energy system, all desires come true almost instantly. Just think about it. This world is very densely populated, and if you wish, you can always find local friends. It should be noted that the degree of perception and understanding of what is happening during an out-of-body experience largely depends on a person's life experience. Some things can cause a real shock, while others can bring tears to your eyes. In any case, this is an unforgettable and meaningful experience that can change your life forever. Having mastered a new kind of travel, Robert Monroe learned not only to visit other worlds, but also to meet with acquaintances who had already passed away. On the pages of his first book, the researcher shares an episode from one of these experiences, related to his family doctor Richard Gordon, whom Monroe considered his friend. Dr. Gordon died in hospital from an incurable disease at the age of 70. Robert wanted to visit him in the last days of his life, but only close relatives were allowed to visit the doctor. When the doctor passed away, Monroe decided to find him on his next out-of-body trip. The researcher had no doubt that Dr. Gordon continued to exist somewhere in another form. Going on a new journey, Robert began to call the doctor by name. At that moment, he felt that some kind of force was lifting him up, and an invisible hand was supporting his elbow. Soon Monroe found himself in a bright room that resembled the walls of some kind of institute. Suddenly, a voice whispered in his ear that if he stayed here, he would see Dr. Gordon in a minute. A moment later, the door opened and a group of people entered the room, talking animatedly. Among them was a thin young man with thick blonde hair. He stared at Monroe for a moment and then turned back to his companions. He looked to be about 20 years old. That was the end of Monroe's journey. He wrote in his diary that the experiment had failed. However, later, while visiting the doctor's widow, Robert saw an old photograph of Richard. In the picture, the doctor was 22 years old, and Monroe recognized him as the same man he had met during his unsuccessful trip. During my experiments, I managed to come to the following conclusions. I became convinced of the existence of a second body that connects or permeates the physical body. This body is capable of moving and acting independently. Some of the sensations of the second body are similar to the usual ones, while others have no analogs. Any movement in the second body is carried out by desire or thought alone, Monroe wrote. At first, Robert Monroe traveled to familiar places on Earth. At first, these were nearby areas, then more remote ones. Later, he began to come into contact with spirit-like creatures, and eventually began to get into strange, unearthly landscapes. In his travels, Monroe described 3 areas that he visited. Our world, where Robert to make his first exits from the body and travel. For example, he flew to his friends, watched them, and then told them what he saw. Friends confirmed that everything happened exactly as he described. The zone of the souls of the dead is a place where, according to Monroe, souls who have left the physical body live. An anti-world similar to ours, but with its own peculiarities. At first, Monroe thought he was in some unknown country, but over time he began to notice differences. He also managed to travel not only through space, but also through time, both into the past and into the future. The second zone is a particularly interesting place where you can meet those who have died. Monroe talked about meetings here with his father, wife, and friends. The main means of creation in the second zone is the psychic force or creative energy of the soul. Here you can create trees, gardens, buildings, and various objects using only desire and thought. A simple thought becomes a force that satisfies any need or desire. Everything you think about turns into reality. However, nothing created there can be transferred to our world. To move in space, it is enough just to think about movement, and it is immediately realized. There is no time in this world. The past and the future continue to exist simultaneously with the present. The natural conditions in this world were exactly the same as on Earth. There were trees, buildings, cities, people, and various man-made objects. Everything looked like a developed, civilized society. There were homes, families, businesses, and the inhabitants of that world also earned a living. They had roads and transportation at their disposal, including rail service. However, the study showed that this place is not connected with either the present or the past of our world. The main difference was the level of scientific development. Electricity, electromagnetism, and everything related to them simply did not exist in this world. There was no electric lighting, telephone, radio, or television. Nothing that would function on the basis of electricity. Monroe did not notice any signs of internal combustion engines or the use of gasoline and oil as energy sources. However, mechanical energy was known. After carefully examining one of the locomotives pulling a train of old-fashioned passenger cars, Monroe discovered that it was equipped with a steam engine. The carriages, apparently, were made of wood, and the locomotive itself was made of metal. The heat source needed to generate steam did not use either firewood or coal. Instead, huge, seemingly empty tanks were removed from under the steam boiler at a stop, which were then loaded onto trolleys and rolled aside. The people working with the tanks in protective suits handled them very carefully. The contents of the tanks were hot, either from heat or from some kind of radiation. The precautions with which these containers were handled suggested a high danger. Robert Monroe has written 3 books about his out-of-body travels and numerous scientific articles about the Institute's activities. However, he did not manage to find answers to all the questions. So many years have passed, and I still don't know how and why this deviation from the norm occurred. At first glance, there is no apparent reason. Medicine and psychology do not provide definite answers. This makes me disappointed and grateful. I was disappointed because my faith in science was undermined. And thanks to those few scientists who have found the courage to approach the problem with an open mind, despite the fact that studying it may cast doubt on their scientific reputation. Psychologist Charles Tart conducted laboratory studies aimed at confirming or refuting the abilities of Robert Monroe. In one such experiment, Monroe, while in an out-of-body state, described seeing a female lab worker talking to a man in the hallway. He was able to describe this man in detail. Later, the woman confirmed that she was indeed having a conversation at that moment, and the man was her husband. However, the rest of the descriptions of events that Monroe made during his experiments could not be confirmed by objective methods. Research has helped me realize that I have some concerns about this phenomenon. Someone may think Robert Monroe is crazy, but I would not recommend making such conclusions. Reading about Monroe's fascinating travels, one can understand how difficult it is to prove the existence of this phenomenon, said Charles Tart. Write in the comments if you have previously known about this outstanding man, and if you have read his books. Do you believe in life after death? Recently, some interesting videos were released on my channel. I strongly advise you to watch them. Please don't forget to like this video if you liked it. See you soon.